Okay, thank you. All right, welcome to the League of Women Voters of Los Alamos Candidate Forum for the candidates for Congressional District 3. We have 7 candidates with us tonight. I'm very pleased they were all able to make it. It took a while to get everybody in. The League is a nonpartisan organization. Our purpose is to educate the voters. We do not express a preference for any candidate or opposition to any candidate. We do lobby for certain issues that we've studied and come to agreement on. You can see our positions if you go to our website, lwvlosalamos.org. So for the audience, we have Lynn, well, I'm Barbara Califf, I think I said that. I'm co-president of the League. Lynn Jones is going to be our timekeeper, and she's the person who will read the questions. And then LWV, that's Joanne Lisney, who is our techie. We're going to begin by having the candidates read their statements or tell you their statements in ballot order. Each one has 3 minutes. After that, we'll have a question and answer period. If you have a question, you can go to Q&A at the bottom of your screen, click on that, and then you can type in your question. And Lynn is going to read the questions. She has a bunch from the League, and she'll read some from the audience also. Each candidate will get 1.5 minutes to answer the questions. I'm going to tell them what order they're going to go in. When the time is nearly up, then I will stop the question and answers, and then they will read each candidate will have 1 minute to read a final statement. So thank you very much for joining us. We're ready to start now. So we start with Teresa Fernandez.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the League for bringing us all together. So I'm Teresa Fernandez, and I am running on a platform of protecting what we love. And protecting what we love, our healthcare, our communities, our democracy, is never as important as it is now, because this pandemic has told us and showed us that the problems we have in our system, when each of those areas is fractured, and it means that we are not able to respond to this pandemic in the way we should. And what I am arguing is that I actually have worked in the key areas that we must now address, both as a nation, as a state, and as local communities. And so what I will bring to the race and bring as your future Congresswoman is deep, deep, real experience building things and getting things done in the district and all of the key issues, which I will address. Healthcare. I've helped build 3 rural health clinics. And indeed, some of those clinics are in the places that are hardest hit, and my heart is crying daily as I read the reports. I've worked on democracy with regards to voting rights. And so as we move into the system to make sure that we are all voting and participating has been very key to what I want and with regards to what I know and will do. And so these key areas, environment, I've worked on those areas before. Broadband, getting broadband in. We know you're gonna hear us all say broadband is important. Well, I have put millions of dollars of broadband in the ground for different communities, and also been frustrated in those times when I haven't put broadband in the ground to some of the communities that right now are impacted. We were not able to get broadband to San Felipe, and I wish we would. I am from Las Vegas, New Mexico, and I went to Head Start in Las Vegas. I then was lucky and got to go off to Yale and then graduate from Stanford Law School. I came back home after getting my degree at Stanford Law School and have been working in community ever since for 30 years. The building affordable housing, working on health clinics, building businesses, a wide range of issues. I've also had 2 presidential appointments. With President Clinton, I was a White House fellow. I helped put together one of the very first White House conferences on housing. I was a special assistant to the secretary for for HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Clinton, that was Clinton with Obama. Because of my history and experience in cultural preservation and environment, I was his vice chair on the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. So I bring deep knowledge of the district, but also I know the Washington that matters to New Mexico, and I bring the combination of local experience and then working at the highest levels of government. I look forward to this conversation. I look forward to earning your support. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you. Laura Montoya.
Well, hi, everyone. I am very happy to be here with all of you, and I want to thank you for putting this forum together during this pandemic. My name is Laura Montoya. I am one of the candidates that's running for Congress. You won't see me on TV because I don't have any money that's from outside of New Mexico. So you'll see a lot of Facebook and website and internet access, and we won't be going door to door because we are respecting the governor's orders. My family is from Las Vegas and Mora. I am the oldest of three. My mother is an educator, close to retirement. My father is a retired Department of Transportation road supervisor and a current councilman in Las Vegas. My sister is in behavioral health. She's a psychotherapist, and my brother is in public safety. He works for the State Fire Marshal's Office. My family has always been a family of service in our own unique way. Mine has gone towards the direction of public service in creating policies that promote equitability and transparency, as well as fairness. For the past 20 years, I've worked in the federal, state, and local government. I started off working for U.S. Senator Jeff Bingaman while I was working on my master's degree at New Mexico Highlands University. I worked for him managing 5 counties in northern New Mexico on constituent services. After that, I worked at the state level, working for both the House and the Senate, along with Human Services as the Marketing Outreach Coordinator for Insure New Mexico, so I'm hoping we get to talk about healthcare today. I worked at the State Treasurer's Office as the Administrative Assistant for both Douglas Minch Brown and Treasurer James B. Lewis, so I really hope we talk about finances, because in today's market and what we've been doing, financial experience is really going to count. I then moved on to working at the county level. I am now the county treasurer in Sandoval County. It's a microcosm of District 3. We have villages, towns, pueblos, the Apaches, and the Navajo Nation, as well as the city of Rio Rancho in this district, in this county. I am very excited about the discussion tonight and many of the issues that are coming up now that we have found that we have not been ready for something this critical in New Mexico. I wanted to make sure that people knew my website as we were having this conversation. It's lauramontoya4nm.com, and my contact information is on there if anyone would like to speak afterwards. I am one of the 2 people that received the 20% at the state convention, and I am looking forward to having this conversation.
Thank you. Marco Serna.
Hi, everybody. Marco Serna here. First, thank you to the League for having this forum, and to my fellow candidates for participating, and all of you listening. We've really been trying to get out, and this is a great way for us to speak with you all. I'm very proud to be your district attorney currently, and honored to serve you in that capacity. And I ran for district attorney because growing up, born and raised here in northern New Mexico and growing up in Espanola, I saw the effects that the opioid epidemic was having on my community and our community, and how destructive it's been. And as a young prosecutor, I saw that we were doing it wrong. And I wanted to treat people like people. And I ran on the platform of addressing the opioid epidemic with diversion programs and counseling, rather than trying to jail our way out of it, because that's the root of the issue. And I bring that same passion to this race for Congress. And I'm honored to bring that passion to this race, addressing economic development issues in rural New Mexico, addressing healthcare in rural New Mexico. And what really sets me apart from these other great candidates is I was the very first candidate when I announced my candidacy to call for the impeachment of Trump. And I did that when it wasn't popular at the time. The leadership in Washington didn't want to go that route. And I did that because I read the Mueller report, and I sent it to a majority of the candidates here, asking them to stand with me, to say, you know what, this man is wrong. What he's doing is wrong, and we need to hold him accountable. And I say that because you want a leader who is willing to make that tough decision, even when it's not popular at the time. I am also the only candidate that I'm aware of right now who has detailed position papers on issues that affect New Mexico and the nation. And one of those main issues, one of the big issues early on, was the Green New Deal. I think we all can agree that the idea is a wonderful idea. We need to make sure that we protect our planet, that we take bold action. However, I cannot support it as it stands right now because it doesn't protect New Mexico's economy. We have to make sure that we usher out fossil fuels and bring in green new technologies responsibly, much like our current governor and our legislature agrees with me, and I agree with them, and they passed a bill 2 years ago, which allows us 30 years, to usher out that old technology, bring in the new technology, and we can be one of the lead producers of wind energy and solar energy, and we can address that with our school systems, make sure that there's curriculums available, that there's programs available to encourage people to get into that line of work, and it's viable long-term options. Also, veteran services. We need to make sure we take care of our veterans. Thank you for all of the veterans who are watching today for your service. You're the best of what America has to offer. And I bring this sense of community to this race. I hope to earn your support, and I thank you all again for participating today. Thank you.
Thanks. Joseph Sanchez.
I just want to say thank you to all of you that are out there watching. Can you guys hear me okay? I know I was having issues earlier.
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, so a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in the Espanola Valley. I'm a graduate of Espanola Valley High School. I have my bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from the University of New Mexico. I have my master's in business administration from New Mexico State University. I'm currently the state rep for District 40 in the legislature. I represent Mora, San Miguel, Colfax, and Rio Arriba counties. A little bit about that. I'm currently the vice chair of the House Appropriations and Finance Committee. So we're instrumental in creating the state's budget. And I know now in June, we're going to have some hard decisions to make with everything that's going on. So I'm going to be right in the middle of that. I have 20 years experience at Los Alamos National Laboratory. 8 of those years were as an engineering manager, where I oversaw over 15 engineers and designers for construction and infrastructure projects. I was also CEO and general manager for Jemez Mountains Electric. They serve 5 counties, 8 pueblos, and 2 nations, over 30,000 customers. We had over $100 million in assets, $1 million budgets. So my real strength is just building relationships with people. I demonstrated to the legislature, and they had the faith in me to make me the vice chair after just 1 year in office. And right now, like I said, I'm in the middle of this huge thing. We're going to have to tackle a huge issue right now. I'm also a former board member of United Way of Northern New Mexico. That does cover Los Alamos, Rio Arriba, and parts of northern New Mexico. I'm also a former Big Brother from Big Brothers Big Sisters. That's just a little bit about me. I'm just excited to be serving in the legislature, and I see this as an opportunity just to help our communities. I've been talking from day one about just infrastructure, water projects, broadband projects. I've been talking about addiction, whether it's alcoholism, opioids, heroin. Those are all huge issues. Roads are huge issues. So I grew up and saw the issues firsthand in our communities. I've seen relatives overdose. I've seen addiction firsthand, and I'm running because I want to help our area. And as a 20-year veteran of Los Alamos National Laboratory, no one's going to be a greater champion for the laboratory than myself. I know Los Alamos was created for the laboratory, and now it's turned into a beautiful community. Great people. I have a lot of friends there, so I look forward to the questions later, and thank you guys all for the time.
Thank you. Valerie Plame.
Thank you, Barbara. My mother was a member of the League growing up, and I've always been really inspired. The work you do for our democracy is so important. Thank you to the League for hosting this, and to all the participants that are in this evening. I was joking that we're all going to be way better at Zoom when we get through this. My name is Valerie Plame, and I am seeking the honor of serving you, this community, in Congress. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I come from a family of public servants. My father was a career Air Force officer. He served in World War II. My mother was a public school teacher. She taught 4th and 5th, 6th grades. And my brother was a Marine in Vietnam. He was wounded there. My family taught me the importance of public service, the power of a strong work ethic, and perhaps most importantly, to put country over politics. So when the CIA recruited me, I jumped at the chance to serve my country again. My time in the CIA taught me that when we all work together, we can solve the toughest problems, and we all win. And this has to be done moving forward as we deal with the fallout from the pandemic. It's rocked all of us to our core. It has challenged us on a global, national, local, and yes, very personal scale. It's shed light on the inequities within our political, economic, and social infrastructures that we simply cannot ignore anymore. And while this pandemic has been devastating, it does present us with an opportunity to perhaps reconstruct an economic system that is more sustainable and, more importantly, perhaps more equitable for all New Mexicans. In the CIA, I serve my country by protecting us from nuclear threats. And I plan on serving New Mexico by ensuring we are safe at home. And that means everyone must have good paying jobs, access to healthcare and a quality education, and safe from threats abroad, pandemic and otherwise. Yes, our economic recovery is going to be long, but I'm going to fight every day to ensure our social safety net is helping those who need it the most, saving small businesses that make our community strong and getting people back to work with good, fit-paying, family-supporting jobs. This pandemic has shown just how interconnected our world is, and that national security, whether from terrorism or disease, has to be fought on every front. We all love New Mexico. We love its diversity, its rich culture, and its incredible beauty. And these are the values that bind us together as both New Mexicans and Americans. We must stand up and fight back against the challenges ahead. I am determined to return to Washington to fight on your behalf to serve and protect our community. I stand here today as the only candidate that's fought a corrupt administration. My battle against the Bush and Cheney White House makes me uniquely qualified to fight on our behalf. To put it simply, I was betrayed by our own government, but I know I'm not alone. Many of us feel betrayed by our government these days, and that cannot continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
John Blair.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining and tuning in tonight. First of all, I'm hopeful that you're watching, that you are healthy and you are safe right now. I think I speak for myself and all the candidates probably when I say that we send some extra love and good thoughts and prayers to our fellow New Mexicans in the northwestern corner of the state who are being disproportionately affected by this pandemic. If I can leave you with one thing in this candidate forum, it's that with all our country is facing right now, we can't afford to be electing someone to Congress who's going to be learning on the job. And of the 7 Democrats running this field, I am the only candidate who worked for President Obama. I am the only candidate with any Capitol Hill experience. I worked both in the US Senate for Jeff Bingaman and in the US House of Representatives and for Martin Heinrich, and I worked in every branch of state government. And that experience matters. Now, I'm a New Mexico native. I was born in Albuquerque and I grew up in Santa Fe. My parents both worked for the state of New Mexico. My dad at the Public Education Department, my mom at the New Mexico Commission for the Blind. And I'm running because the families I grew up with in Santa Fe, the families all across this district, are being left out by the dysfunction of what's happening in Washington on Capitol Hill. We've got Republicans who care more about NRA lobbyists than they do about kids getting shot in school. We've got Big Pharma lining their pockets with billions of dollars while we're still paying too much for prescription drugs and clawing our way out of this opioid epidemic. And we've got a president and Republicans who care more, who are pretending that the climate crisis doesn't even exist, and that's ridiculous. I've had the privilege of being on the front lines for the last 25 years, fighting for New Mexicans and New Mexico values. As I mentioned, I worked for President Obama at the Interior Department, helping to fight climate change, protecting public lands and waters. The entire Obama administration invested billions of dollars in clean energy technology and fought the fossil fuel companies to make them reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emissions coming out of their plants. One of the best parts about my job was getting to help make new national monuments. My first month on the job, the president designated the Organ Mountains Desert Peaks down near Las Cruces as one of New Mexico's newest national monuments. Now, I also worked for good New Mexico Democrats like Jeff Bingaman, who opposed the war in Iraq and fought to protect public lands like the Valles Caldera. Worked for Congressman Martin Heinrich, who helped pass the ACA, voted to overturn Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and helped pass a law to make it easier for Native Americans to buy a home on tribal land. Most recently, my husband and I returned home to Santa Fe, and I served as Maggie Toulouse-Oliver's Deputy Secretary of State. Now, again, what I can tell you is that that experience matters in the ability to actually get things done for this district, to bring resources and ideas and people. Again, I'm John Blair. My website's johnblair4newmexico.com, and I look forward to talking to you more tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kyle Tisdel.
Yeah, thank you so much to the League for inviting me and all the other great candidates here to talk with you. And thank you to everyone who is tuning in and paying attention. Obviously, in this current health crisis that we're in, I think all of our campaigns are trying to find new ways of reaching voters and talking to folks. And again, very much appreciate the League and their efforts to bring all of us together so that we give voters a real choice in this election. I am a public interest environmental attorney. I've spent my career fighting for people and communities living in the shadow of fossil fuel exploitation. But my most important job is I'm a father of 3 kids that are 8, 4, and 1.5. And so I spend an awful lot of time thinking about their future and the world that they're going to inherit. The reason that I got into this race is not because I have built a career aspiring to become a politician or building relationships with wealthy donors or insider Democratic crowds. It is because we are in the midst of a climate crisis, and it is going to take profound action on behalf of the federal government and the state government and nations all over the world to sufficiently deal with that crisis. I have spent my career as one of the top climate litigators in this country, holding our federal government accountable to the science and the timeline of the climate crisis. Here in New Mexico, I've led the litigation to protect Chaco Canyon and Dene communities who live in the shadow of that exploitation. I've protected Santa Fe National Forest from oil and gas leasing. And over the course of my career, I've protected millions of acres of public lands from fossil fuel extraction and development. That background and holding our federal government accountable and fighting against the status quo and big oil and big coal in the process makes me uniquely qualified to take these interests on behalf of New Mexico. And here's the thing, New Mexico has operated as an energy colony for big oil and gas for generations. And right now, as we're seeing the collapse of the price of oil and gas, we see how foolish it is for our economy to be tied to extractive industry. That said, there is tremendous opportunity for us to lead the clean energy economy of tomorrow, which includes the expansion of renewable resources throughout the state, but it also includes things like taking a look at how we deal with the legacy of pollution and how we restore our public lands, and with it create opportunities within our rural communities to bring additional resources and vibrancy and prosperity to our rural communities. So again, my name is Kyle Tisdel. I thank you so much for joining me today and all of us, and I look forward to having the conversation.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. So once again, I'd like to tell the audience, if you have a question you would like to ask, you need to click on Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and then you can type it in. Lynn Jones is going to read questions. Each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to respond. And I will call names of the candidates in the order they're going to speak. So Lynn.
Okay. We don't have any questions from the audience currently. I think they just haven't gotten primed. So I will ask the first question, which is, what actions, if any, should Congress take to address the influence of money in politics?
Joseph Sanchez.
So I think right now this race is a great example. I think over 90% of the money I've raised is within CD3. Local money, I think it's over 95% actually, and money's driving politics right now. I know as a party we're always complaining that money drives politics, but we look at this race and there's people that have raised over $1 million, and I'm not judging on that. I'm just saying that's the way it is. I'm doing my best. I have to work 10 times harder, like other candidates that haven't raised money, to travel around the district. I've been to every single county numerous times. I'm putting up my own signs. I spent the last 3 weeks putting up signs in all the counties. It's tough. It's a tough thing. People that don't have access to money or know people that have money have a tough time. And I think we're leaving out a lot of quality candidates the way things are. So we definitely need to figure out something to resolve that issue. Now's a prime example. This race is a prime example. I know social media, I've been trying to get out there, my website. Before this all started, face-to-face interaction, I was having a lot of events, public events with a lot of people. But like I said, it provides a huge disadvantage to a lot of qualified candidates. It just opens it up to other people. Thank you.
Valerie Plame.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm sure all my fellow candidates will understand when I say this as well. You get in, you decide that you're going to run because you want to serve, not because you want to ask your friends and your family and perfect strangers for money. And that shows how ridiculous this system has become. The power is into the incumbency. Once you get into office, those tend to stay there because it does, as Joe Sanchez was just saying, what it takes to fund a campaign is wrong. We need real bipartisan campaign finance reform. Right now, neither side is willing to do that. And we have something in place, Citizens United, which I happen to believe one of the worst Supreme Court decisions they have ever handed down. And what happens is there's all sorts of money, dark money, corporate money that has come into our campaigns and deeply distorted our democracy. So when I'm in Congress, this is something I feel very passionately about, and I'm going to work to change.
John Blair.
Thank you. So I spent most of the last 2.5 years as the Deputy Secretary of State here in New Mexico for Maggie Toulouse Oliver. And during that time, we promulgated a rule that requires additional disclosure of campaign contributions and expenditures here at the state level. And I'm very proud to have been a part of that, of shining more light onto the system. I absolutely support overturning Citizens United. I'm not taking a single cent of corporate PAC money in this campaign, and we have to get big money out of politics. One of the things I'd like to see us do is to expand public financing of campaigns. Right now in New Mexico, we have it for our statewide judicial races and the PRC. I'd like to see us expand that to members of Congress and to U.S. senators and beyond. You know, what we are seeing is that those with tremendous wealth are having an outsized influence on the debate, and it's unfair to most Americans. And we really need to do all we can to limit money coming in from anyone who lives outside the United States, shrinking the size of contributions. You know, it really has an outside impact on what's happening. And because of those campaign contributions, I believe strongly that has kept us from taking meaningful action on climate change. It has kept us from taking the meaningful action to get the weapons of war off the street and to say no to the NRA because of all the money they're dumping into politics. It is keeping us from really getting across the finish line to achieving universal care for everyone. So we absolutely have to get big money out of the system. There are about 13 or 14 different bills in Congress right now that I'm looking at that I would co-sponsor when there, but I'm committed to doing this in Congress. Thank you.
Thanks. Kyle Tisdel.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you know, money in politics for a long time has been eroding our democracy, and Citizens United sort of lifted the floodgates. And so, you know, as sort of an outside candidate who hasn't sort of built his career to get into politics, the barriers for a campaign like mine are very real. You know, we have a system right now, quite frankly, that is more akin to a plutocracy, where the wealthy and the elite rule, rather than where the people of this nation send their representatives to Congress to represent them. That needs to end. And if we want a different type of politics in this country, we need to elect different types of politicians. And that includes folks who are not tied to big money, who are not tied to corporations and lobbyists that are having an outsized influence on the types of laws and policies and regulations that we pass. We are not going to be able to face the challenges of our time if that system remains in place. So I wholeheartedly support the full public financing of qualifying candidates in our elections. And I think that that is, quite frankly, one of the only ways that we are going to get a different type of politics in this country. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa.
So the question was, what can Congress do with regards to campaign finance reform? And so I think there are many things. The three that I will talk about was one, which we all agree on, is end Citizens United and overturn that. And there are different ways that we can go about overturning it. I do want to point out that I have been endorsed by End Citizens United. And the reason I was endorsed by End Citizens United is because I have a history and lots of experience fighting for democracy, not this democracy electoral, but democracy, which means making sure that voters' voices are heard, because that is the problem with Citizens United and with everything we're talking about here, is the voice of the voters is not heard. And that's something I've dedicated 20-some years to doing, making sure we had access to early voting in the rural areas, in Native American areas, working against gerrymandering. So I come with a history of that, which is why End Citizens United endorsed me. I'm not taking corporate PAC. The second thing is the big other bill is For the People Act. And that one addresses all of the different issues with regards to public financing, disclosures. There's another bill that is very specific about disclosures. So I think that those are the things that we need to do. I agree with those other candidates. We're all on here saying this big money it's distorting what we should be focused on. And what we need to focus on is to make sure that the voters' voices are heard. And that is why we need to fix this. I think a constitutional amendment may also work.
Thank you. Laura.
Thank you for asking this question, because as a treasurer, I always follow the money. I actually find it sort of interesting to hear some of these answers, because when you look at our campaign finance reports, some of them are not accurate as to who's putting in money where. And a lot of the money, almost 500,000, has come from California, New York, Texas, Washington, Maryland, DC, Virginia, not New Mexico. So New Mexico's not for sale, and neither am I. It is critical to know where to follow the money. And I'm really proud of my colleague Tisdel and I supporting the Pledge for the American Promise, because it protects elitism and corruption from handling our campaigns. We need to remove special interests and dark money from our campaigns. And New Mexico District 3, I am so thankful that we are people powered, that people pay attention and people care about who is really representing them, who has the experience, who has the drive. I support campaign finance reform, and I am very proud of the fact that all of our money, 95% of our money, has come from working class families here in the district and in New Mexico, or people that I have worked with throughout my career of the 20 years of public service. I think it is very important for everybody on this call to look at our FEC reports. We just had one on March 31st. I was very disappointed. I put out a press release that 10% needed to be contributed to help with the pandemic that's going on, and only one of my colleagues was in answer of that. So I hope if we all do that, it's 150,000 that can go towards helping people.
Thank you. Marco.
Thank you for the question. First and foremost, doing away with Citizens United. I think we all agree with that. It's allowed large corporations to get involved into politics. And perfect examples are Big Pharma, the NRA. These are huge organizations that put a ton of money into influencing politics. So that, first and foremost, needs to be overturned. Second, I'm also in favor of public finance. It puts everybody on a fair playing field. I can tell you, I think everybody agrees who is making calls that it's not easy to call people and ask them for money. You don't want to call your friends and family to ask them for money. Unfortunately, it is the unnecessary or the necessary, evil with politics right now. So I would fully support doing away with Citizens United, sponsoring any bills or co-sponsoring any bills to get laws on the books to overturn that. And that's one of the reasons why when elected, I would love to be on the Judiciary Committee so that I could ensure that we put in good judges into our Supreme Court that aren't going to allow these types of laws to continue like, Trump and his cronies and all of the people he's gotten in. So with that, I strongly agree with overturning Citizens United.
Thank you. Lynn, you have another question for us?
Okay, our audience has become active. What have current candidates done to help those in need during the COVID-19 crisis?
Okay, Laura Montoya.
Thank you for the question. I would really urge everyone who has Facebook to look on there because I might forget something we've been doing. But I have participated with Operation Bandana New Mexico, which is having hundreds of men and women in New Mexico help make masks. We've been putting in some fabric and elastic and bias tape, and I just got an email just now that the governor's office is going to help us get those POs done so that we can help create more masks to get them out to the particular hotspots in McKinley, San Juan, and Sandoval County. We've been working directly with our pueblos, with our Navajo Nation. We've been getting water tanks with working with our water associations like San Luis out to Torreon. We've been able to help with food distribution. I just finished visiting again with our food depot to make sure that we have enough food distributed every single time that we have our different counties having that food distribution with Samaritan House and Salvation Army. We have been working on the 30 seconds, on the elected official side. I've been trying to work on the stimulus package, making sure that our businesses have been able to get that second grouping of money, which we just got this week. We're trying to make sure that state and local governments are able to get their stimulus funding. We're working on that still. We're trying to make sure that the CARES Act only had allowed for 500,000 people or more to get funding, which meant everyone in New Mexico didn't get it except Bernalillo County. So now we're fighting to make sure that the rest of the state is able to get that. And there's plenty more on the Facebook.
Thank you. Marco.
Great question. So first, we did a video trying to get people to adopt dogs during this pandemic because a lot of people aren't actually adopting dogs anymore. And little did they know that here in Santa Fe, they're actually providing people with food and other services so that people will continue to adopt dogs and make sure that they don't have to be euthanized. In addition, we did a town hall last week where we really pled with individuals across the district and hopefully across the country to help out the Navajo Nation. The Navajo Nation, as we know, is ground zero in New Mexico for this pandemic, not only with active cases, but with fatalities as a result. So we want to make sure that we put that to the forefront, join our former governor, Bill Richardson, in raising money for those individuals. And actually this weekend, we're going to be going back out to San Juan and McKinley counties to take out other face masks and whatnot so that we can help those individuals the best that we can. But I think this is a great forum to let people know we need to make sure that these individuals get the services they need. And rural New Mexico is being hit the hardest in addition to the Navajo Nation.
Thank you. Joseph.
So what I've been doing is about 3 weeks ago, I helped put together some care boxes for our senior citizens and helped to deliver those here in Rio Arriba County where I live. We're going to again this weekend for our youth. We're putting together care boxes with Mr. Ralph Martinez, who is the director for the homeless shelter that I helped get funding for. Also, I had planned on having a huge event at the OK Casino to raise money for my campaign. But now that we can't do that, what I'm doing is a virtual concert with a bunch of bands. It's a Cinco de Mayo event that's going to benefit the Roadrunner Food Bank. So basically, we're going to be having that on Tuesday. I hope you all tune in to my Facebook. Also, I visited an orphanage in Gallup, New Mexico, which serves Navajo children that don't have families. I know I posted that on Facebook, soliciting contributions to them. I know they need a lot of supplies like ketchup, mustard, tissue, things like that. A couple weeks after I did that, the Navajo Nation president actually showed up to deliver quite a bit of supplies, so that was pretty amazing. I was happy to see that. So I've been quite active, just trying to help the communities. I've also purchased hundreds of pounds of beans for our senior centers and also for different things going on in our communities to feed the people. So I've been doing that on top of just trying to get signs up and speak up with people. So I've been pretty busy. Thank you.
Valerie.
Thank you. What is so difficult about this particular situation we find ourselves in is that in other emergencies, we would be so quick to physically jump in and do something. And given the public health aspect of this, we can't do it in the way we might typically. There's two ways that what I've approached this. Because of my campaign and the reach that the social media has, we have really made sure that we are consistently and frequently putting out information in emails on Facebook and other platforms that lets our community know where the resources are, where they can find them, information that is solid, that is reliable. And for my own personal side, I have been contributing as we can through what I give financially, either through set up something through Temple Best Shalom has done a lot for the community, as well as the Food Depot. So I know we are all want to help our community, and as candidates, that is our responsibility. And from what I've seen of everyone's campaign, we are all trying our best to do that.
Thank you. John Blair.
Thank you. So first of all, we have sent an email out to everyone on our list asking that they donate to local charities here in New Mexico and some national charities that are doing work here on the ground. We're very excited about that, those dollars coming in. We're going to continue to do that and to encourage folks to make donations to some of the funds that are specifically dedicated to helping the Navajo Nation and the tribes all across New Mexico. Second is that every week I've been holding a virtual town hall, and we've been hosting guests who can help appease some of the fears and anxiety that people are having. We had the Secretary of State come on to talk about what's happening with the election in light of this pandemic. How do people vote? How to check their registration? How to make sure their vote still counts? A few weeks ago, we had Rich Brown, who is the Director of Economic Development for the City of Santa Fe, on to talk about all the various stimulus packages that are being made available, both at the state and local level, how to access them, sharing all the best websites and information for people who are small business owners. Even we talked about what happens if you're trying to start a small business now, what's the best way to try to do that. And then last week we had Kate Noble, who is the president of the Santa Fe School Board, talking about tips for parents of what they can be doing, those who might be struggling a little bit with trying to work from home and teach their kids at the same time, what they should be expecting in terms of the end of the school year, technology, what schools and classrooms might look like in the future. So we're doing a lot of information like that to be as informative to the public as possible. And then finally, in our free time, which is not as much as we'd like, my husband and I have been baking cookies and treats like that. A friend of ours is helping to give treats to St. Vincent Hospital and the other medical community in Santa Fe to make sure they're getting just something sort of brighten up their day. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you. Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think the one thing that is really telling about this pandemic is that while it's not discriminating in terms of who it's infecting, it absolutely is in terms of the impacts of this pandemic and the way that it has an outsized impact on those who are most vulnerable in our communities. I have a lot of friends that live on the Navajo Nation from the work that I've done with Dene communities. So personally, we've been donating and supporting all of those efforts to provide relief to frontline communities who are dealing with just a tremendous wave of this pandemic that is ongoing. Just the numbers today out of San Juan and McKinley County far surpass anywhere else in the state. There's also impacts in our own community. Living in Taos, for over a decade, we have been providing meals to our local homeless shelter on a monthly basis. And that is something that we as a family continue to do. And our homeless shelter here is now providing, instead of just nightly meals, 3 times a day. And so we're providing meals multiple times a week to our homeless shelters. We're helping to distribute food within our community as cars line up around the block, as over 26 million Americans have declared or filed for unemployment under this pandemic. And so, our communities are being hardly hit. And so, as a candidate, but also as a person and a family, we are really oriented around service. And so I ask everyone out there to do that as well.
Teresa. We can't hear you.
My sons are cooking dinner, so I didn't want you guys to hear the chopping. So, like many of the other candidates, I think we all are, and our listeners are all affected. And the concept of doing this together, we're all in this together. That's one of the things I hope we take with us as we come out of this pandemic, because we are all in it together. Some of the specific things that we've done is, similarly, we have thousands of people we can send an email out to, and what we've done there is don't donate to me, because donate directly. So we have direct links to the Native American Relief Fund, and we know that there have been lots of donations going that way, and opening up and people donating directly. So that is really heartwarming. Personally, the Moving Arts Española, I'm trying to support them. They have done such amazing work. Roger is, not just a CNN hero, he is our own hero. I've also been working directly working on trying to get loans for some of small businesses. We've been providing pro bono assistance to those. And I've also been pushing in Congress and making sure, because some of their initial SBA guidance would have cut a lot of people out. We worked on pushing that. Congress, some of our congressional delegation pushed back. We got some good SBA back. So doing things both on the policy level, on the personal level, and then with the campaign, asking everybody to participate as one.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, another question from the audience. What is your position regarding the Holtec waste storage site proposal, and what would you do to support or oppose it?
Valerie.
There we go. I absolutely oppose it. I don't like the notion that New Mexico would be used as this waste disposal treatment. From what I understand from the proposals, the technology behind it being proposed is still in a testing phase. There's not the environmental protections that we need around it. It just appears to be another instance of where corporate greed is pushing way further than what the actual community wants. And I am against continuing to build it out, and a lot more environmental study needs to go in before we make any further decisions.
John.
I oppose Holtec as well. I do not want to see New Mexico become the dumping ground of nuclear waste for the entire country. And I think this would be the next step in that happening after WIP. My understanding was that when WIP was created, I believe Senator Bingaman agreed he finally would support it if this was the one station like that in New Mexico. I do not want to see this happen. I know the comment period has been extended. I encourage anyone who's watching to weigh in and discourage that from being built here in New Mexico. But we need to fight like everything we've got in us to ensure that that is not built here in New Mexico.
Kyle.
Yeah, I too oppose the build out of Holtec. It does speak, however, to this deeper problem that we have in this country with the legacy of pollution. And this time it's coming from the military industrial complex and our love of nuclear weapons in this country. And, at the same time, I'm also mindful of the fact that there is a proposal to vastly expand pit production at Los Alamos. And that would develop a whole new generation of nuclear weapons that we're going to have to deal with the waste. And so while I do not want to see New Mexico become the dumping ground for the nuclear industry, we as a country have got to get real about how we deal with the legacy of pollution, how we are going to deal with the cleanup, and how we are going to move forward and protect our communities. There are some innovative technologies that would take, for example, spent nuclear fuel rods and use those in sort of micro generators to produce electricity. And so we need to, my opinion is that we should use our national labs and the incredible ingenuity and intelligence that exists in our national labs and be leaders in the solutions to this cleanup problem. And that's where I would like to see public funding go.
Teresa.
I joined the chorus in opposition to Holtec. And I think part of the problem with Holtec, not just that they want to use us and that we become the sacrificial state for nuclear waste, is this is also the issue of we are allowing private companies to profit. Private companies to profit out of something that the nation needs to address and fix. And I think when we allow private companies to profit out of those things that should be government, because that's a problem and it's a big problem, and that includes whether it's prisons or nuclear waste, we need to oppose that so that we don't have a profit motive undermine what should be an issues around safety, environmental safety, future safety. And there's a lot of problems with Holtec. I have attended several of the meetings where we had our wonderful Representative Christine Chandler speak on what the state could do, Garcia Richards saying what the state could do, but the state can only do so much, and that's where the federal government needs to come in and regulate this kind of activity so you don't put it in an area where there's a lot of fracking going on too, which is also a problem, right? So what you're doing is they're trying to compound one problem on top, an environmental problem on top of another problem, and I joined the chorus opposing it.
Thank you. Laura.
I oppose it. I oppose anything that doesn't protect our land and our water. There's no Safety Environmental Protection Act that is being utilized for this. There's no environmental impact statement that has been done. And this adds to the bigger conversation of why is it that they always feel that they want to put things that are dangerous or impactful to our water, our land, and our people here in New Mexico, being that we have a percentage that is higher in people of color. It's the same situation and story that you see happening in the Navajo Nation and Pueblos where they're trying to do fracking. I completely oppose that. Here in Sandoval County, we've had to fight our own county commission to go against this. So I strongly believe beyond even just Holtec, we should always look at having accountability and transparency and making sure that we're protecting water, land, and our people and our air.
Thank you. Marco.
I agree with everybody. I completely oppose Holtec and its expansion here into New Mexico and its expansion altogether. There is the Yucca Mountain repository that costs billions of dollars that was built and isn't being used, but I still think we also need to focus our investments into making sure that there's a clean way to store this, and there's other means and new technologies to address this issue. Planting sunflowers has been one study that's been done. Laser systems has been another study that's been done that I think we as a country really need to focus on and follow how well that's working, because whether it's in our state or another state, it's just not acceptable. So with that, I completely agree with the majority here, and I presume everybody's going to agree with this in opposing.
Thank you. Joseph.
I think this is a project where this is one of those things where nobody wants that in their backyard, but I don't know how much control we're going to have whether or not it happens. I think we need to make sure the process goes through and all the important studies are done to determine whether or not it's safe or it's going to hurt our state, make sure all the engineering reviews are done correctly, that it meets all requirements. Like I said, I'm not sure how much even as a congressman you could fight this, and anybody could fight it, but I think it comes down to making sure it's done right if it does happen. And I like I said, make sure all the reviews are done, people get their comments in, anybody that's a stakeholder, we need to make sure they get their input so that their concerns are brought up, especially the people that live in that area. We need to make sure they have a loud voice in what happens. So I think, like I said, nobody wants this in their backyard, but if there's nothing we can do, we got to make sure everything's done correctly, and that everything, like I said, everything's done everything's met, every requirement's met. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, Lynn.
Okay, next question. This is a district with a large Catholic population. What is your stand on Roe versus Wade?
Barbara, who goes first?
Sorry, Kyle.
I absolutely support Roe versus Wade, and my belief is that women should have autonomy over their bodies, period. That we should not, the federal government or state governments for that matter should not have a role in legislating women's choice around their health and their future and fundamental questions around their economic viability. To the same extent, we also need to make sure that people who are choosing to have children are supported in that decision. And I think so much of the opposition to abortion doesn't have similar feelings around, children after they're born. And so, this is not just an issue of legislating away a woman's right to choose. Even if legislation goes through, that impact is going to be outside felt by the most poor and vulnerable people in our communities. It will not do away with abortions. It will make them more dangerous and more risky. And so absolutely, we need to do everything we can to support Roe versus Wade. And that starts with our Supreme Court and making sure that we do not have judges on the Supreme Court who are legislating from their convictions, in terms of their conservative values. Thank you.
Teresa.
So I fully support maintaining Roe v. Wade. I come from one of those wonderful big Catholic families, and I recognize, and in fact, my mother who went to Mass every day recognized that this decision, whether how you have your family, what you have your family, has to be made. It's a very personal decision and must be made without governmental interference, where the woman is in conversation with those she most trusts. I'm very pleased to be carrying the banner for Planned Parenthood. I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood, and it's not just being for Roe v. Wade, it's also saying we need full funding for those organizations like Planned Parenthood, which is the largest women's health organization, because we need to make sure that when women's health is, we need to fund it so that they can have the full conversation about their health needs. So we need to fully fund those organizations that provide that information, because then we also lessen the need for abortions when we can make sure there is access to reproductive health. I've also been endorsed by Emily's List because they recognize that I am a champion for women's rights on these issues and for full funding for the full panoply of what women need with regards to their health care and their reproductive rights.
Thank you. Laura.
Thank you for asking the question. I too am a Catholic. My parents are Eucharistic ministers in the Catholic Church. I don't believe that this is a religious issue at all. I believe that this is a right. And when you're talking to somebody who's worked in treatment and seen that poor women try to get abortions and the rich people can get them and the poor ones end up dying, that's a concern of fairness and equitability. You also look at it from a standpoint of, if women cannot be equal at the playing field, at the table, in their wages, we will never have equal access to healthcare and to pay, as well as to our own rights to make our own decisions. And so I think people need to take the emotion out of this and understand that this is a right issue. This is a fair and equitable standpoint. So I am pro-choice, and I believe that all women can make their own decisions and talk to their own people to determine what's in their best interest for their health and well-being.
Marco.
Great question. I fully support Roe v. Wade. And we see exactly what the GOP does with this issue. We heard Ledger Fernandez discuss Planned Parenthood. Well, let's look at Planned Parenthood. 98% of what they provide is free healthcare for women and men. 98%, and that's education, that's checkups, that's all forms of free healthcare that are usually in lower economic areas. In addition to that, we need to make sure that this is a right, that individuals do not have a say in a woman's reproductive health. And I think we should start saying reproductive health rather than pro-choice, pro-life, because the GOP has really stigmatized those two phrases. So this is about reproductive health and a woman's right to choose her own reproductive health. No man or woman should be able to address that issue, but that individual. So Roe v. Wade was a great case that came out of our Supreme Court. I fully support it, and I will continue to support not only that, but all rights for all individuals throughout this country.
Thank you. Joseph.
So this comes up every time, and I think it's no secret I'm the only pro-life candidate. A big thing for me is abortion's legal, but what I oppose is late-term abortion unless a mother's life is at stake. What I do support is programs to help mothers that do choose to have children, whether it's child care support or other programs. I would fully support those types of things. Other things as education, I'd be a huge advocate for that. So I think it'd be important to mothers that do decide to have a child, that we help them out and we take care of them. So that's my position.
Thank you. Valerie.
Thank you. I have been a fierce advocate of women's rights and women's reproductive rights my entire life. Long before I had a twinkle in my eye about running for Congress, I did a lot of pro bono speaking on behalf of Planned Parenthood across this country, because I believe so strongly that a woman has a right to choose what her future will look like. This is not something, as the other candidates have said, this is not something that the government should be involved with at all. And this is, in fact, a real intellectual hiccup in what those on the other side see, that the government should be involved in this and yet in other aspects of life. No, this is something that only the woman and the most trusted people around her that she chooses to share that with should make that decision. And I'm really sorry to see that the pandemic and the ensuing anxieties around it are being used by the federal government, the certain people, parts of the federal government, to push again to close down access to abortion, to make it safe and accessible. New Mexico, in many cases, is becoming the place where other women come because they can still get the health care that they need here. So it is absolutely something I am a strong advocate for, and it's called choice for a very good reason.
Thank you. John.
Thank you. I fully support Roe v. Wade. I'm a proud feminist, and I will actively fight to ensure a woman's right to choose in Congress. You know, we have seen this play out at the national level, at the state level, and the local level. I've been very vocal about a number of attempts here within this congressional district in the northwestern part of the state of local city councils trying to restrict a woman's right to choose, declare themselves so-called, oh God, I'm gonna forget the name as I'm saying that to you right now, but sanctuary cities, thank you. And we have to speak out against that at every level. We are fortunate that New Mexico has much more progressive laws when it comes to this, but we are seeing firsthand that Texas and other states are utilizing this pandemic to restrict women's ability to choose for themselves. One place we really have to be careful as well is in terms of the financial aid we give to the rest of the world. The foreign aid is often caught up in the ultra-right-wing agenda by refusing to allow reproductive health and other education services being given to women all across the world. That is unfair, and we have to fight that as well. But I will do everything I can to ensure a woman's right to choose in Congress.
Do we have another question?
Another question? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you support a consumer privacy protection initiative on the national level to address the collection and use of personal information?
Marco.
I do. I think we saw firsthand what can happen when information is shared, specifically during or what the access is with social media and everything that we now do on the internet. We saw with the prior presidential election the effects that when people have the right information, what they can do and the harm that they can do to individuals and to an entire country. We need to ensure that there are protections for all individuals throughout this country to have those protections so that their information isn't shared to who they don't want to share it to. I know when we all fill out an application, we don't want that sold to every corporation in America and abroad. So I do support them. Thank you.
Joseph.
I 100% support this. People's lives have been ruined as a result of this issue. Like Marco mentioned, that information is so critical. People are able to ruin somebody's life just because they get access to certain information. So we need to make sure those items are protected. And that's my position. Like I said, people's lives are ruined, and I would 100% support that. Thank you.
Valerie.
Yes, in the aftermath of 9/11 and in our panic and in our fear, Congress passed a lot of laws to make sure that something so terrible would never happen again. And what we saw then, some years later with the Snowden revelations, is what the government did with that information that they collected far beyond what the law allowed. I'm not taking a position this evening now on whether what Snowden did was right or wrong, but the fact is we know about it. Historically, when the government gets privacy information, those that are in the minority and the most vulnerable are the ones that are going to be hurt. And now bring it up to today as we're dealing with this pandemic. Naturally, from a public health perspective, we are discussing, the need for contact tracing. And many people will gladly give that information to the government because there's a public health aspect to it. Jared Kushner is leading the charge from the White House. Well, I might suggest that historically, this is something that in Congress, as your next Congresswoman, we really need to have a deep discussion about this and the balance between security and privacy, and what does that look like in our democracy?
Thank you. John.
Yeah, absolutely. I support additional consumer protections. When I worked for Mr. Heinrich when he was in the House of Representatives, he actually introduced a bill that would have protected people's passwords from employers requiring that they be overturned. Clearly, there's a role here to limit the amount of data that government is collecting that we don't even know about. There's also, I think, a really big role when I get into Congress. Something that I want to focus on is the sheer volume of data that the new monopolies are collecting. You know, we think about monopolies of the late 1800s, early 1900s, steel, oil, these sorts of industries that had to really be broken down. And we're now seeing them in a digital way. Google, Facebook, these major organizations that are collecting every piece of data, every button I click on, every photo I look at, who I friend, what they buy, what we see, what we do. Everything is being collected right now and is being used against us and used sometimes for us, but we have to be very, very careful. And, you know, we've crossed the Rubicon where now we hear about another breach where some credit card company had their files broken and 30 million Americans' information went out. I feel as though people have started to shrug. I mean, do people just assume our information is out there? We can't let that be the new normal. We have to ensure that any data that is being collected, that the user has agreed to that data being used, how it's being used, if it's being sold, to whom it's being sold, all that sort of information. We have to do a lot more, and I'm ready to do that.
Kyle.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I think this goes to the core of the information that we can keep private and the use of that to our detriment, not only by the federal government, but by private corporations. We have seen that take place at the national level with the last election cycle and the way that the Trump campaign has used that personal data to influence voting in this country. But John is right. This happens on a daily basis by all of the big data companies that are out there. And so one of the things that I would support would be the application of antitrust laws on those new modern day monopolies. Companies like Amazon that are not only collecting data, but are using that to try to control the supply chains for their own private profit motives and private gain. And so there's a lot that we need to do to protect consumers in this country and to protect all of us from our data and information getting into the wrong hands. And that is going to take a strong role of Congress to implement those types of protections on consumers and the everyday information that we're sharing when we're just by virtue of now existing on the internet. So yes, I absolutely support those broader protections.
Teresa.
I too support the broader protections, and I think what we need to do is recognize that what we have seen, and not just now, but definitely with this administration, but it had been growing anyway, is that a weakening of consumer protections all over the place, right? And so we need to look at, people don't want to say that other countries do things well, but some of them do, right? And what they're doing in Europe in terms of requiring that some of these big monopolies, I agree with the antitrust and the breaking up, and that we need to recognize that what they're doing, the platform that they're using is indeed a public good. The United States helped create this public, and we don't regulate them the way we regulate utilities. Well, they're part of the new utilities, and we need to start regulating and enforcing those programs from here, and using some of what these same companies are much better when they're operating in France or England. And so we need to look at those as models. But I really want to go back and also strengthen, the Consumer Financial Bureau, because there is so much out there where we're consumers, they say, oh, you signed up, you said it's fine. But that was because there was a lot of little print and you didn't have time to read it because you just wanted to get what you needed. And so that is not working. The manner in which they are having as okay, it doesn't work. And so we need to put it back into a manner that we can all understand, and that when we consent, we know what we're consenting to and it's easy to understand. And we do that before they're allowed to gather everything.
Laura.
I believe that it's critical to support people's privacy. As far as the consumer privacy protection, there's two aspects of it. One is making sure that there's accountability and enforcement for anyone who utilizes it in a bad way. A lot of times the people who get preyed on the most are elderly and are disabled. In federal legislation, you have banks and couriers who have done an excellent job in making sure that they protect people's privacy, and we should do the same thing in every other aspect of our daily lives. In particular, now that we are starting to utilize our internet more frequently for all different types of business and personal lifestyles, I believe that there's another aspect to it. It's cybersecurity. As Vice Chair of Finance, Pension, and Intergovernmental Affairs, we have been working diligently on making sure we have cybersecurity not only to protect our elections, to make sure that people trust us and trust that their vote is being counted, but also making sure that with our banking, our financing, and our intergovernmental actions and interactions with one another, that we are being able to protect and secure the privacy of people and of the government.
Thank you. So we were supposed to finish at 8, but we got a late start, and the league never does this, but I'm making an exception tonight. We'll take 2 more questions and then the candidates will give their final statements. So the next question, please.
Okay, what action, if any, should Congress take to relieve the United States Post Office of its financial distress?
John.
Well, there's a real opportunity. And first of all, we have to recognize that what's happening right now, despite the post office having been in some level of economic distress for years and years and years, is that we're seeing President Trump intentionally make this worse for his own political agenda. He hates Jeff Bezos, he hates Amazon because Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, which doesn't often say good things about President Trump. And so he was trying to cause harm to this one entity. There are countless New Mexicans who work in the postal system. When you work on Capitol Hill, sometimes people make fun of it, but a lot of the smaller bills that get passed are renaming post offices. But it's a big deal for a community to have a post office in its community. It is a stamp that they are there. They will continue to be there. And so we have to continue to provide for Postal Service. As part of this, one of the big things that I'm not hearing as much talked about right now is ensuring the ability for these postal employees to retire with full benefits. That is something that has been in jeopardy for some time. But what we need to do is take the politics about it all, take out the politics of all of this, and stand up and help these working men and women.
Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is ridiculous in the relief aid that Congress is passing that we can find $500 million or $1 billion, right, for the biggest corporations that exist, but we can't find the funding to make sure that our postal service remains solvent. You know, I think this is entirely tied not only to Trump's political agenda, but quite frankly, the fairness of the upcoming election. We don't know long-term what the length that this current pandemic is going to last. I know all of the candidates right now are out saying that everyone in this district needs to vote by mail in our June 2nd primary. But come the election in November, the Postal Service could have a huge role to play in who our next president is going to be. And I think that, you know, the Trump administration is also looking at as another way to undermine the security of this election. And so, yes, we absolutely need to provide funding to our Postal Service, and we should also make sure that our Postal Service not only remains in every community, but becomes and increases in terms of becoming the type of hub for public services, not only in the mail that we get and passports, but in voting rights and all of the different things that our postal services can, that our postal offices can do in our communities.
Thank you. Teresa.
I think we have to recognize that, which the candidates have also done, is the role that the Postal Service does. It plays, and you know, not only do they get named, but they become, in many of our small communities, we have lost so many of the places where people gather and speak and share, and that is what community is, and that's what makes us strong. And in many of those places, that's all that there is left, is that post office, because you know, the big box stores have taken everything up. But this comes to another thing, which is what is government supposed to do? And what are the key pieces of infrastructure that government should provide? And I would say that our ability to communicate with each other, and the United States Postal Service is one of those things that government should make sure that there is a nonprofit, a governmental way of communicating with each other, so that once again, it's not pure profit. So it's not only FedEx, it's not only UPS, but that there is rather a service. It is a service, and government should provide that service. And so there are many things that you should do. The post office actually does make a lot of money, but there are certain things that it must do because it is a federal service. And we need to simply recognize it and fund it. I mean, that is like what we should do, is just fund it for what it needs in those areas that it cannot provide for itself, and treat those employees as federal employees, because boy, right now they're on the front lines, but they always do, right? They're always there delivering the mail, and they are key to our mail-in ballots and our absentee ballots.
Thank you. Laura.
This is an interesting question, because I've been getting a lot of emails from people in the small rural communities that work in these small post offices and fighting for their jobs and making sure that the post office doesn't close. We've learned in this pandemic that post offices are essential to our day-to-day operations. Today, I needed to send elastic out to Gallup so that they can continue to make the gowns that they are running out of for the area. The same way that transportation doesn't usually have stimulus, doesn't have money that comes in, it's not a way of making money, it's the same way the post office is. And it should have been a part of the CARES Act stimulus. We need to start looking at it as part of the same responsibility that we are taking for our small businesses, and being able to give them some stimulus funding to be able to stay solvent.
What's the next question?
In particular, in our rural communities, it is very important. A lot of our rural communities, they don't have the same access that the city does to a lot of different items. So they have to make sure that they are able to at least mail things out. And we also need to diversify it. Make sure that we're utilizing our post office in the 2020 mindset and giving them more options of different services to accommodate the growing economy.
Thank you. Marco.
You know, I think one thing we all recognize is these individuals are working day in, day out during this pandemic. They are on the front line. And essential workers and first responders. So we have to respect that first and foremost. Second, the U.S. Post Office or U.S. Postal Service, they're providing us with the necessary tools, services, and the masks, equipment that we need to fight this pandemic. And if it weren't for the U.S. Post Service, we would definitely be hindered not only in this state, but across this country. In addition, if you go to any rural post office, you'll see that this is where people put notices. This is where people congregate, so that if they need to put out a notice about something going on in that community, they put it at the post office. If you ever talk to any postal workers, they're so proud of what they do, the service they provide. So we need to make sure not only that we protect them, but as Laura said, these small communities, they rely on their postal office to get their mail. I know my mom, a small business owner in Espanola, she relies on the postal service to provide her with the necessary information she needs with her vendors to get her own stuff out. So I think we need to ensure that it is safeguarded and that we give the proper funding. And also, as a few candidates said, we need to make sure that Trump doesn't use this as a means to affect the election coming up in November.
Joseph, you were off the screen for a while. Is it okay?
Sorry, I had to rejoin with my phone. But
okay.
the questions about the Postal Service, the Postal Service is so important to our country, the history alone, the services they provide, the workers, that's a lot of jobs. We need to make sure we protect those jobs and fully fund them. We need to make sure we fully fund their retirements. I have friends that retired from the Postal Service. I know they were part of the union with the Postal Service. And it's an important part of our community. They deliver the mail to us. I know we got private companies that are a fashionable thing now, but at the end of the day, who's going to be there for us and going to deliver the mail? It's going to be the U.S. Postal Service. So we definitely need to make sure they're fully funded and protect them, and make sure we protect the retirements of their employees.
Thank you. Valerie?
Yes, thank you. I find it absolutely infuriating that Trump is using, yet again, a personal grievance, and in this case, to go after Jeff Bezos, to tear down yet another piece of the fabric of this country. I find it just outrageous. My understanding is that some years ago, Congress basically hamstrung the Postal Service by passing legislation saying they needed to fund future pensions at an unbelievably high rate, much higher rate than, or percentage than what would be typically advised otherwise. And that is why the post office has been struggling now for some years. Why, as other candidates have pointed out, this needs to be fully funded. The recognition of what post offices do for our nation, as well as, because of so much of this district is rural. When you go, we've all driven around every little town in this district, and the post office is the gathering place. We must support that. And finally, as other candidates have spoken about, the absolute crucial importance of mail-in absentee ballots to election security, and making sure that all our voices are heard in the upcoming elections and all the others going after that.
Thank you. So last question, Lynn.
Last question, would you change our current ways of providing and paying for healthcare?
Teresa.
Absolutely. What we have found in this crisis is that a system where we are relying on employee-based insurance doesn't work. It doesn't work because you end up having, we have, the numbers who are unemployed now and their families are now without health insurance. And so I do believe that we should transition to a single payer system. I've come out with that earlier. And the key thing about this is what strikes me, there's a wonderful Yale study that looked at that and that pointed out the billions that would be saved every year. But more importantly, the lives that would be saved, because we all know somebody who they might have insurance, but their copays and their deductibles are too high, so they don't get care. And so therefore we don't have access. The three things we need to make sure is access. Our healthcare is accessible, affordable, and quality. And right now we don't have this in the United States. We have 30% of the healthcare costs are caught up in administration, in profits, and that doesn't work. And so the thing that I have been saying is that yes, we need more of a Medicare for all, but we also have to fix the problems there in Medicare before we do that. The kind of bill I like is Representative Jayapal's bill, which also says that bill talks about how you prioritize rural health clinics. I said at the beginning, I've helped build rural health clinics, so I'm never going to give up on them. And we need to prioritize making sure that rural health clinics and rural providers receive the pay they need.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, first of all, healthcare is a universal right. We should all have access to healthcare. And what this pandemic has really illustrated is how so many Americans have been left out by what's happening in Washington. Particularly, we have seen how many Americans who have been relying on their employer-based health insurance, not only are they being furloughed, but the second bomb to hit them is that they're losing their health insurance as well. I'm very proud that I worked in the House of Representatives for Martin Heinrich when the Affordable Care Act passed and became law, also called Obamacare. Unfortunately, what we saw when that was done was that the Republicans in Congress took every attempt they could. I think we voted to repeal that law some 36 times over 2 years because they just hated President Obama and they didn't care about the people who might lose coverage. And so even after President Obama left office, we've seen Trump and the Republicans in Congress continue to chip away at the Affordable Care Act, the individual mandate. They've done all they can to damage the exchanges. So my first priority in Congress would be to stabilize the Affordable Care Act for all Americans, ensure that the exchanges are working, that people have access to care even outside of their employer, and that we build up a strong Medicare system to the point that if Americans choose that is the best option they'd like to pursue, that's what they take. And then we have to continue focusing to ensure that access is affordable for all Americans. Right now, we're still seeing people having to choose between the medicine they need and putting food on their table or a roof over their head, and that's unacceptable.
Laura.
So I'm glad you asked this question because I was just trying to analyze between the bills today now that COVID hit. And we all, I believe, support affordability, efficiency, access. I've mentioned a rural component, being able to have telemedicine if we had actual broadband that worked in our rural communities. No surprise medical bills, no co-payments, deductibles, or out-of-pocket spending, including dental, hearing, and vision. But the problem right now with Medicare for All, because I was trying to compare between Medicare for All versus Medicare for America. And I know some people will say, well, it's because it's $30 to $40 trillion within 10 years or the 20% tax increase. That's not why I would be against it, because I think sometimes you have to spend money in order to make money. And for everyone to have healthcare access, everybody has to pay a little bit. But there's a little bit of other concerns that I had. With Medicare right now, it makes fraud easy. It makes scamming seniors easy. It makes Medicare communication systems fail regularly. It eliminates the DoD's TRICARE program, which is 9.4 million U.S. military hospital folks. The employers will pay a required 75% of what they are currently paying for healthcare, which right now our businesses are struggling. So then that would put us in a worse situation for those people who work for small businesses to be able to continue to have that healthcare. So I don't necessarily think that that's the right plan. The other thing is I'm a union supporter, and you really have to have options that are allowing our unions to continue to have their healthcare coverage. And as you know, in Los Alamos, a lot of us are government insured. So that's why I fought in Congress against the 40% excise tax, and we need to make sure our government employees are taken care of.
Thank you. Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we have the healthcare system today that we have is because insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, private corporations are making obscene amounts of money on the backs of the American people. We are the only developed country in the world that has this medical system that is completely upside down. And if the current health crisis doesn't tell us or show us how important expanded medical coverage in this country is, I don't know what will. You know, the Affordable Care Act did a lot to expand coverage, but it still has left over 10% of New Mexicans uninsured. And health expenses are still the #1 cause of personal bankruptcies in this country. Health should be a right, not a privilege, and that's why I support Medicare for all. We should have a healthcare system where all you need to do to go in to get healthcare coverage is provide your name, and that is it. And all of the other expenses are taken care of. The other sort of component of this is access to healthcare. And in rural places like a lot of this district, you know, we are seeing healthcare providers and hospitals not being able to financially make it. So we should have look at reimbursement programs and rate increases for rural healthcare facilities to make sure that our rural services remain robust and available to everyone.
Thank you. Valerie.
Yes, thank you. And this pandemic has ripped off any remaining shreds of some notion that what we have now is actually working. It is not. We are the richest country in the world. We spend more per capita on healthcare, and our outcomes are far worse. We cannot continue doing this. And that might be the silver lining, perhaps, in this difficult time that we are all going through. Everyone will agree that what we have now, what we have to build toward is access, affordability. And far too long, as other candidates have said, this has been the realm completely in legislation of insurance company, pharmaceuticals, and those that make these laws, lobbyists in behind closed doors. We can't do that anymore. Employer-based healthcare is a thing of the past. Why? Because we are looking at Great Depression era unemployment figures. How is that going to work? I just read an article last night, and it was heartbreaking. It was about Alabama that had not advanced Medicare under Obamacare. And there are so many women, particularly of color, dying of easily detected and diagnosed cervical cancer that don't even know about it until it's too late because they don't have any access to health care. And this is absolutely immoral, and we must do better.
Joseph.
So we need to make sure we provide an affordable option for those that don't have insurance. Right now we have Medicare and we have Medicaid. We need to greatly expand those two programs. As a state representative, I voted to protect existing conditions. That's an example of my position on Medicare. With Medicare, we need to make sure that's fully funded, and those in poverty, they're fully have access to health care, and those people that are in the middle that don't have access to health care, going full blast to Medicare for all. I think we need to offer an affordable option where if it's working for people and people like it, I think by default, those that have employee insurance or other insurances, if they see that that's the way to go, they're going to jump in it, and by default, people are going to go to the better product. So I think our government needs to demonstrate that they're going to do a good job taking care of that. For example, look at our VA hospitals, the issues they've had. I think we need to start gradually and build to that direction, but we need to see how that works. So I know a lot of people are happy with the insurance they have right now. Union electricians, I have brothers that are union electricians. They're happy with their insurance right now, but we definitely need to provide that affordable option.
Thank you. Marco.
Great question. I am in favor of expanding the Affordable Care Act. Excuse me. I can tell you as a state employee, I appreciate the option that that the state has negotiated for me. As many of you know, I spent a month at UNMH with my young son in Leticia due to meningitis, and he's doing great, by the way. But I appreciate that negotiated policy, because now I'm getting the bills, and I can tell you, had it not been for that, I'd be filing for bankruptcy right now. And I know that unions also appreciate the negotiation process and the plans that they get. I think people should be allowed that private plan if they so choose, and those who fall in tough times have the public option as well. A lot has been discussed about access. Completely agree. We need to invest not only in proper clinics and recruitment for individuals in rural New Mexico and rural America for that matter, because those are the places that suffer the most. But we need to also make sure that the individuals have access, because if they don't have access, what good is great health care if there is none? So I am in favor of the 149 million Americans that currently have that option, and I would expand it in Congress.
Thank you. Okay, now it's time for the closing statements. We're going to go in reverse ballot order, so we'll begin with Kyle.
Yeah, thank you again to the League for hosting this conversation this evening, and for everyone tuning in. I very much appreciate it. This current health crisis that we are in, I think, is exposing a lot of the gaps in the current systems that exist, and the way that the vulnerable and the poor and the communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the policies that exist in this country. We need to use this moment as a springboard to expand the way and look at how we take care of people in this country. The climate crisis is going to bring with it a number of additional crises that we're going to have to face. And so we need to get real on how we take care of people in this country, and we need to start preparing for the climate crisis and maintaining a livable planet for future generations. These are the type of changes I've been calling for from the beginning in my campaign, and I don't want to take up any more time, but thank you so much, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you. John.
Even before this pandemic, the country was facing a number of major crises at one time: a climate crisis, a constitutional crisis, an epidemic of gun violence and opioid and heroin abuse, infrastructure crisis, a housing crisis. And that's all being compounded now by the COVID crisis. And this country is really needing experienced leadership right now. And I genuinely feel it would be reckless to elect someone to go to Congress right now who doesn't have the experience or who would be learning on the job. I am the only candidate in this race who has worked for President Obama. I am the only candidate in this race with Capitol Hill experience, having worked both in the US House and the US Senate, and I am best equipped to hit the ground running. I thank you for watching. Please follow me on social media or at my website, johnblairfornewmexico.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and I'd love to earn your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Valerie.
Thank you. I am seeking this honor to serve this community. Everyone that is here this evening brings something to the table, but I believe why my advantage is my national security experience, my crisis management experience and leadership, which this state and this nation is going to need in the very hard months and years ahead. I know what it's like to be betrayed by our own government. I think many of us feel that way ourselves right now. But more importantly, I know what it's like to get back up off the floor and then to thrive. And I want to be able to put my life experiences to good work for my community, for my state, and for my nation again. And I look forward to earning your support. And I thank everyone and the League for doing this evening.
Thank you. Joseph. I can't hear.
Our state. I'm sorry, somebody muted me. Okay, I got unmuted. So I was born and raised here in northern New Mexico. I went to the public schools. I went to our state colleges. I've seen firsthand the issues that our people here are facing, whether it's addiction, poverty. Like I mentioned earlier, I've had relatives that have overdosed. I have relatives that have fought to just have a livelihood. And The reason I ran for state representative was to help my district, Rio Arriba, Mora, Colfax, San Miguel, Northern New Mexico. And now running for Congress, I want to do that for our entire state and the district. I have the experience professionally. I ran the largest co-op in the state, over 100 employees. I was an engineering manager at Los Alamos National Laboratory. No one's going to fight harder for the labs to protect their funding than I will. I have family that works there. I have neighbors that work there. I will do everything I can to support that place. They contribute billions to New Mexico's economy. They contribute millions to New Mexico in taxes. So I just want to lift New Mexico, and that's why I'm running. Thank you.
Thank you. Marco.
Thank you again for having us, and thank you for the participants. I'm a community-oriented candidate, and that's what I brought in my district attorney race, and that's what I bring to this congressional race. From the very beginning, the opioid epidemic, the economy, and addressing healthcare have been my three major issues from the very beginning. And I want to say that even with this COVID pandemic, they continue to be, because we have seen the effects that it's had on all three of those issues. I want to make sure that I fight for Northern New Mexico. Again, I am the only candidate with detailed position papers that I hope you all go and watch. I've been truly honored to be your district attorney, and I would be truly honored to continue my service here in Northern New Mexico as your next Congressman. Thank you again. I hope to earn your support, and I would appreciate your vote.
Laura.
Thank you all for the opportunity, and thank you for putting this together. When you look at your absentee ballot that you're going to be receiving from the Secretary of State next week, you have a big responsibility as a voter. And we have a lot at stake, not only for the June primary and how we're going to be able to help Congress to get back on its feet, but we're going to need to make sure that we get the president out of office in November. We need someone who has electability. I've been elected twice in the fastest growing county with a 50-50% split. Representation should reflect who you are and what you value. And it is critical for somebody that does have experience. So when we talk about experience counting, I've been the staffer on the ground, whether it's cleaning the pipeline mess that happened in the restroom, or making the copies, or handling the investments of over $40 billion. Right now, we have a huge crisis on our hands of how we're going to get back on our feet. I have 17 years of government experience at the federal, state, and local level. I have worked in the House and the Senate. I've brought the most conservative Republican and the most liberal Democrat together to be able to help remove tax loopholes and help our seniors. Please visit my website, and please take that right very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa.
Thank you so much for bringing us all together. I started saying that I'm running because I want to protect what we love. And when you love something, you want to not just protect it from harm, you also want it to thrive. And I want our planet to thrive, right? I want to protect our planet from the harm that we know this climate crisis is going to bring. And this climate crisis is not going to be temporary the way this pandemic is. And so we need to address that. And I want our communities to thrive, and they need the kind of support from the federal government that we require. And I tell you that I have that experience of knowing it on the ground level and then having it at the top level from DC, working with both Obama and Clinton. And so I ask for you to go to teresaforall.com. I ask for your support. I ask for you to join me in this effort to protect what we love. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you all very much for giving us your viewpoints, and I'm sure the audience appreciates it. I wish I could see them. I want to let you know that we have recorded this forum and we'll post it on YouTube. We'll send the link to the candidates and the press, and there will be a link on our website at lwvlosalamos.org. Tomorrow night, we're going to have another forum for the Republican candidates for CD3. And on Monday, May 4th, we'll hold a forum for the candidates for New Mexico. These are candidates facing opposition for New Mexico Senate District 5, Public Regulation Commission District number 3, District Attorney for the 1st Judicial District, and for our County Council. An email invitation will go out to all league members and friends. If you're not on our list but would like to view the live forum, you can send email to me, president@lwvlosalamos.org. Thank you very much, and thank you, Joanne, for assisting us.
Thank you.
Good night and stay well.
Thank you so much.